Frank Zappa was well known for being a musician's musician. A good part of his musical legacy and reputation rests on the fact that he had such a far-ranging technical knowledge of music theory, and he was an experimental musician who wasn't afraid to try new ideas, while all the while remaining quite aware of the math of music theory and the math of musical expression. And I think that this fact makes his following comments about Jimi Hendrix all the more interesting, and I want you to listen to them and tell me what you think. I want you to also stay tuned after I play the clip of Frank Zappa commenting on Jimi Hendrix, because I have a clip from Paul McCartney that's extremely relevant to this particular conversation. So let's listen in here to what Frank Zappa had to say about Jimi Hendrix.
Well, Jimmy came to our house one time with Buddy Miles. This is when we were living in New York. And they walked in and said hello. Buddy sat on the sofa and immediately passed out and was snoring. And shortly thereafter, Jimmy, who was wearing green velvet pants, demonstrated some sort of intricate dance step and ripped the inside of his pants, and Gail had to sew them back up for him. And then, as they were ready to leave, Jimmy woke up Buddy Miles, and he said, "Goodbye, Frank," and they went out the door.
Your thoughts about his music?
I had written in articles at that time that I thought what should be done, since he wasn't musically literate, he couldn't write it down himself, that he should be put in some sort of working relationship with somebody who could write his ideas and have them scored for instruments other than the electric guitar.
Now, the idea that Hendrix was a musical genius on the level of a Mozart or a Beethoven or a Bach, a classical composer, something like that, is not entirely surprising. But the key thing that Zappa says there is that he felt that Hendrix's musical vision went beyond the electric guitar. And this is the point where I think I disagree with him. I think that while Hendrix was a phenomenal visionary, part of his musical aesthetic was wedded to the guitar in such a way that it wasn't just his vehicle of expression, it was his vehicle of inspiration and his vehicle of communion with his muse. So if you put him on another instrument, I'm sure he'd do great. And if you put him in a room with a stack of staff paper and a pen, and he knew how to read and write music, he could compose a wonderful symphony, the likes of which the world had never heard before. But this was not Hendrix's destiny. Hendrix's destiny was to raise the electric guitar up to a level that others had not previously even imagined. And why is this distinction so important? Well, I think it goes back to a really simple but slightly evasive idea, which is the difference between folk art and fine art. So Hendrix had the talent, capacity, vision, and aptitude to be a fine artist, but his career and all of the music that he's made is deeply rooted in folk art. Difference between the two kinds of art is not in value or merit, it's just in type. Fine art is a kind of art that's made from established theoretical, canonical rules, and it's almost like a science, the science of music or the science of painting or the science of writing. Whereas people who are out in the world creating on their own from their, pulling things out of the thin air like Hendrix, that is folk art at its highest form. One form isn't better than the other intrinsically, but they are very different. So the reason that I take issue with what Frank Zappa says there is that the music that Hendrix was making through the folk rock idiom, through blues, through hard rock and psychedelic rock, I think is more valuable to the world than the music that he would have made had he acquired classical training or had he collaborated with classical musicians. Now, I don't say that it wouldn't have been an interesting side road for him to take. What I'm saying is I don't think that the world is missing anything because he didn't do it. Now let's reflect a little bit more on what Frank Zappa said there. He said, when they came into his house, Buddy Miles immediately passed out and Jimmy split his pants doing an extravagant dance move, and they had to be sewn back up. I think part of what Zappa was driving at with he needed to get somewhere where he could collaborate with some serious musicians other than the kind of blues and rock crowd he was hanging out with also had to do with Jimmy's lifestyle, also had to do with Jimmy's drug intake and the company that he was keeping. But I think that this is the reason why the music that he was making was so good and so resonant with the world, is because he had not gone so far into music intelligentsia and music theory and the fine art of music that he lost touch with the pounding soul of the pavement. Now, I want you to listen to something that Paul McCartney had to say about his own musical aptitude and knowledge and theory. Let's listen into what Paul McCartney had to say about being literate in musical theory.
Generally, I like a bit of a melody to get hold of, you know.
And counterpoint, too. You're known for that.
Well, I mean, you know, I don't really know what the official explanations are for what I'm doing. There was a famous article that John and I had on us by William Mann of the Times, who's no longer with us, but it was a great article. It was all about the Beatles and the Aeolian cadences and the pentatonic.
And you said what?
You said, what, pentatonic
what is he talking
clusters?
About? Yeah.
We said, what's a pentatonic cluster? He said, well, you know, like, I think it was the end of She Loves You was that.
But there are those who would say, for all of his genius, for all of his greatness, for all of his experience, McCartney doesn't read or write music.
No, well, that's true. But I've never
let that stand in your way.
I've never thought it was a drawback. In fact, you know, there's many times I've tried to learn and I've decided not to. Now, I don't think I really want to learn now. I've got a kind of superstitious feeling that I'll learn too much. See, I work with people. Somebody like Carl Davis is a great talent. I mean, he used to be a child prodigy on the piano, and he can write music down. He's just phenomenal that way. But I notice when he comes to write a melody, he knows Schubert's work, he knows Mahler's work, he knows all this stuff I don't know. I mean, I've vaguely heard, you know,
but
I know the sort of Nutcracker Suite and the sort of popular stuff, but I don't know the way. And what I find is he starts to wander into a Schubert melody. Now, I think it's an advantage that I don't know where Schubert went.
Now, what Paul McCartney said is what I've been saying, basically, in regard to the idea of Hendrix either learning to read and write music or collaborating with serious classical musicians. In the case of the former, I think it might have actually had a bad impact on his artistry. And in the case of collaboration, I think it might have been an interesting side project, but I don't think that the music that he would have made according to classical principles would have been any more moving or interesting or impactful on the world than the music that he made with his guitar. So for my own part, I'm glad that Jimi Hendrix remained musically illiterate, because I think the music that he made was better because he didn't know what he was doing. But what I really want to know is how you feel. Do you think Frank Zappa is right? Do you think Jimmy should have sat down with some serious composers, classical musicians? Do you think Jimmy should have learned to read and write music? Do you think that the resulting material would have been better than the material that we have? Because, as I've said throughout this video, I disagree with Frank Zappa on this one. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Also, if you're enjoying the videos, consider hitting the thanks button right down there below. Or if you prefer, click on the Buy Me a Coffee link and go to the Buy Me a Coffee site to leave a donation over there. Thanks a lot.